A little over a year ago, I did a whole video project for ADK mics focusing on their whole TFET line of solid state microphones. I think I had every single thing they made here in the studio for that video. They had just come out with the Munich M7. That was a big project. So we've been talking a lot about doing the same thing with their Z², their new Z2 line of more premium tube-based microphones. I had looked over their line and talked back and forth with Miles, and we thought about doing something just a little bit different and maybe just focusing on one mic out of that lineup instead of all of them. I had looked at what they had available and just based off what they're kind of loosely based off of, because again, they each kind of have a sonic signature that's somewhat familiar with some other microphone, but ADK puts their own twist on the design. So it's not a straight up clone. It's more of an improvement in ADK's take on that kind of classic mic style. So lots of cool vintage flavors. I told Miles right off the bat that the one mic in that lineup that I probably wasn't that interested in was the 800 model, which is kind of their take on the Sony C800. I've got a fair amount of experience with that mic, working in other nicer studios. Clients, especially if they're doing more modern pop vocals, always ask for that mic. And I've had a rocky relationship with the Sony mics. Just, I don't think they're bad by any means, but definitely my cup of tea. And so I think Miles kind of took that as a challenge, and he sent me some clips of some people using it on acoustic guitar and some other sources, and I was surprised. It kind of had what I would expect out of that style of microphone in terms of kind of the scoop mid-range, really open, beautiful, just very present high-end. But there was this mid-range character that I was hearing in all of the examples that Miles sent me, and I was like, wow, this actually sounds interesting. I'd actually be curious to check out the 800. And so this was an interesting proposition because I'm kind of looking at a mic that I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards, but because, as I found with their TFET line of mics, ADK kind of puts their own spin on things. I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. So again, usually the Sony kind of style, modern open mics aren't my cup of tea, but I think we're all going to be surprised by this one. So let's go ahead and get a general idea of how the mic sounds, and we'll go through some tube swaps as well. Let's start out by miking some acoustic guitar. I think this is when I'm trying new mics, generally I start out with acoustic guitar when I'm getting to know the mic. Just a nice full range instrument. You can get some nice transient material in there. So I have two of the Z800s here, so I can do some stereo pair stuff on like piano, drum overheads, maybe a few other things. ADK also sent me one of their Z49 microphones. I think when we get to drums, we'll have two of the 800s overheads, and we'll have the 49 on drums. Might add this in on piano as well, because when you think of this on like a sonic spectrum, the Z800 is like on the far end of the spectrum, much more open sounding, modern style microphone. The Z49 is all the way on the other end. It's very just warm, full-bodied, vintage sounding. This is more the old school vintage Neumann style. This is much more modern. So we're just going to go back and forth on these on acoustic guitar just so you can kind of get an idea of the full spectrum of the ADK Z line of microphones. Again, we're covering opposite ends of the sonic spectrum. This will also just give you a very good reference to kind of get an idea of how open sounding and articulate the Z800s are. So very different sounding microphones, but again, these are the extremes of the spectrum of the mics that are available in the ADK Z Series 2 mics. Again, very kind of warm vintage Neumann style, very modern, open, Sony. So this might seem weird, but here's what I want to try now. We're going to go back and forth between these two mics again, but on the Z49, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Fab Filter Pro Q4 EQ, and I'm going to do an EQ match on the Z800 to try to make this mic sound a little bit more like the Z800. This is something I'll do occasionally if I have a mic that is maybe very different sounding than a lot of the other mics I have. So the purpose of this is just to try to determine, let's say I take one of my mics that's more darker neutral sounding and I try to just do a bunch of EQ and stuff to make it sound more modern. How close is it going to get? And we will get closer sonically between these two, but I think you'll start to appreciate some of the things, and especially in the higher frequencies, and how even if you try to EQ another mic and make it brighter to match this, they still sound pretty different. Because again, we're talking about completely different capsules, very different transformers. I think this has a Lely transformer in it. I can't remember how to pronounce those, but very modern capsule design, very modern transformer, more vintage sounding. So let's do an EQ match on the 49 to bring it a little closer to the 800 and go back and forth a few times. So I've done this a few times before I shot the segment just to see how they'd sound, but I'm definitely hearing some very unique things in the high end with the Z800, to where, we're taking another mic and trying to match it with an EQ afterwards, but there's definitely something very unique about the high end and how it's extremely open sounding, but it doesn't seem to be too harsh yet, which is a great start. The low end is very interesting on this too. It's a bit scooped, but because this kind of modern Sony style mic is definitely more made to be a modern vocal microphone. But the interesting thing I'm finding with the Z800 is it's still got that sonic character where you've got a bit of a scooped mid-range, a very open, maybe a little hyped high end, but the low end is still very punchy. So it's going to be really interesting to do vocals on this. But yeah, we're getting closer with an EQ on the 49, but definitely not really coming that close to the Z800. So great start. Let's try some tube swaps on the Z800 next. Those results were pretty interesting. I've done a fair amount of tube swapping in different tube mics over the years, and I have to say, those are some of the more drastic results I've heard swapping tubes. Now, the interesting thing between all three of those tubes is they're all JJ brand tubes, so we're not, necessarily jumping to vintage old stock or, Mullard versus Electro Harmonics or anything. Same name brand, just a different kind of slight topology. Big difference, that 12 AY7 that kind of comes stock in all of their tube mics is kind of what they designed the circuits around to optimize it. With the 12 AY7, I'm definitely kind of hearing that stereotypical kind of Sony thing with the scoop mid-range, much more, sparkly, open high-end. The ECC81 was a little subtle. That ECC83S, it's boosting that level like 3 dB inside the mic. So aside from the sonic differences of the tube, you're loading the circuit differently as well. So, driving the transformer and other things inside of it. So pretty interesting. I think most people looking for a more kind of Sony clone, Sony style mic, I think you're going to gravitate towards the 12 AY7 tube. For whatever reason, I just loved what I was hearing through the ECC83S. And so as we move forward now and we start getting into the instrumental segments and I start recording a whole song with this mic, I'm going to have the ECC83S inside of the Z²-800 for all the examples unless I specify otherwise. You'll see that when we get to the vocal segments, I'll have two of the 800 side by side. We'll have the 12 AY7 on vocals as well as the other mic with the ECC83 level match, so you can hear the differences. But moving forward, I really connected with the ECC83S for whatever reason, so that's what I'm going to use for the next couple of instrumental segments. So let's start on acoustic guitar. I've done some interesting things. I've kind of taken, since it's a very piano-based song, I think the acoustic guitars were just a really simple, easy filler part. So I've kind of doubled up on them. In the first pre-chorus and the second pre-chorus, you're going to have two different guitars going, mic'd the same way, but standard tuning. I'm just playing slightly different on both guitars. Then as we move into the chorus at the end, I'm going to switch to a third guitar that comes in, and it's going to be in an open tuning. So lots of different guitar parts. Let's start with that. I'm starting out with piano because it's going to be the main instrument in the song. It's going to be piano driven. I've started out with 2 of the Z800s over the hammers. This is typically somewhere I'll kind of start for more pop sounding music like this. I also have the Z49 back kind of where all the strings converge. I'm not necessarily looking for a clear articulate sound from the 49. I do want it to pick up a lot of low end and body from the piano so that I can fade these 2 mics left and right and then fade that one in just a little bit down the middle just to add some body and low end and help glue everything together a little bit better. This might seem kind of like a weird arrangement for the stereo mics up over the hammers, but I'm not the best piano player, so this is going to be a very simple piano part. Everything stays in the same register, so when I have situations like this where there's not a lot of variation or movement on the piano, I kind of fine-tune the mic specifically for that part in the register I'm playing in. So I've kind of done that specifically for this song. So this placement's kind of tuned in for the register I'm playing in for the most. Left mic, right mic, they'll be switched since you're looking from the other perspective right now, but the Z49 is going to be blended in down the middle. So let's take a listen to all of it together. So once again, for these 2 vocal segments, for my vocals and Rachel's vocals, I've got 2 of the Z²-800 set up side by side. One of the mics has the 12 AY7 tube in it, which is going to give you your just more stereotypical scoop and open high end that you'd associate with this kind of mic. The other mic's going to have the ECC-83S, which is a lot, it's boosting the level inside of the mic. It's a lot more aggressive with the harmonic content. It brings out the mid-range a little bit more, so it's less scooped. Just a lot more colored and a lot different. So as we go back and forth on the vocal segments, I'm going to level match between the 2 so you can hear the mic with the 12 AY7 and the ECC-83S, which I think it was important to spend some time really listening to the differences between those 2 tubes, especially on vocals, which I think most of you are going to be interested in, because to me, with the right singers, it can almost sound like a completely different mic. This is not kind of subtle tube swap, things where we're picking at little details. To me, this makes a big difference. So let's take a listen to those. This climate took its toll on everybody that I know. We've walked through thick and thin to start it all over again before the next wave comes. This climate took its toll on everybody that I know. We've walked through thick and thin to start it all over again before the next wave comes. That never-ending road of always doing as you're told. Our hearts can only beat so loud till we burn this down to the ground. Take away my everything, I don't even need to breathe. Take your guns and gasoline, find a spark, what did it even mean? There's violence in those flames, and beauty as we watch it burn, comfort in the pain, and silence as the world is screaming. Will we ever learn? When war is all we seem to yearn, there's violence in those flames, and peace when all the embers burn away.
Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this down to the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this down to the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this into the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this down to the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this down to the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this into the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud. Never-ending road, that never-ending road, oh, 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 oh. Never-ending road, that never-ending road, oh, oh. Before we burn this thing to the ground, our hearts can only beat so loud. Before we burn it down to the ground, our hearts can only beat so loud till we burn this down to the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud until we burn this to the ground.
Now that we've finished recording the whole song, it's time to kind of listen to the whole full song montage. Whenever I get to this point in the videos, I just like to tell people that I try not to overmix the song when we listen to the whole thing. I think that it's important for you to hear just everything kind of in a bit more finished context with some basic EQ and compression on it, so you can kind of hear things mixed to an extent. What I don't want to happen is for you to hear all these drastic mix decisions that I might make, because, you know, we can, with all the plugins and stuff that we have access to, I mean, I could make this mic sound like a U47 on vocals if I really wanted to. So I'm not over mixing. I'm just doing some basic EQ and compression and some stuff over the master bus just so you can hear everything in a bit more finished context. Don't forget that in a link in the video description, I'll have full session files available for you to download. And I think especially for all you people that are obviously interested in this mic with vocals, both for my vocals and Rachel's vocals, I've got two set of files on pretty much every single vocal, well, where we had the mic doubled up, and one of them had that AY7 tube and the other one had the ECC83S. Again, to me, it almost makes it sound like a completely different mic, so I really wanted everyone to have access to some files on vocals. We could really hear those two tubes level matched side by side. So let's move to the full montage and take a listen to the full song.
This climate took its toll on everybody that I know. We've walked through thick and thin to start it all over again before the next wave comes. That never-ending road of always doing as you're told. Our hearts can only beat so loud till we burn this down to the ground. Take away my everything, I don't even need to breathe. Take your guns and gasoline, find a spark, what did it even mean?
Our hearts can only beat so loud till we burn this thing into the ground. Our hearts can only beat so loud till we burn this thing into the ground.
There's balance in those flames, beauty as we watch it burn, comfort in the pain, silence as the world is screaming. Will we ever learn? War is all we seem to yearn. There's violence in those flames, and peace when all the embers burn away. There's violence in those flames, and beauty as we watch it burn, comfort in the pain, and silence as the world is screaming. Will we ever learn? violence in those flames, and peace when all the embers burn away.
As I close out this video, there's just a couple of things I wanted to run through really quickly. It's really interesting coming back to microphone designs like this that I kind of shrugged off to an extent. I've been lucky enough to work with a ton of great mics over the years and, play around with some of the big boys, and, things like the Sony just weren't things that I ever connected with. And then to somehow connect with this Z²-800 like this was just a really interesting experience. There are things with the Sony over the years that I just felt like I've fought with whenever I've had to record or mix with one. And I wasn't really finding that with the Z800, especially when we jumped to some of the different, tube swaps and stuff like that. ECC83S made a really big difference. And even jumping over to doing vocals and trying, mixing this whole song using like the 12AY7 instead of the ECC83, I never really ran into harshness issues. I think on the mix that you just heard, I kept the ECC83 take as my main vocal mic when I did the mix, but for Rachel's vocals, I stuck with the stock 12AY7 and never had any harshness issues. It worked really well. After I did the mix, I actually just finished that a few minutes ago, but the really interesting thing that happened in the mix was going into it, I was very cautious about how I was going to treat my mix bus. I have a tendency to usually mix things a little bit darker, and so over the years, one of the things I've done over my whole mix bus is just compensate and boost the high end at the very beginning of the process so that I'm putting myself in a better starting point, because I do have a tendency to mix darker. I was afraid when I went in to mix this song this morning that if I boosted the high end significantly with something nice over the whole mix bus as a starting point, that especially for vocals, I was going to end up just fighting harshness issues, because especially something in the Sony camp, very sizzly, hyped high end. That didn't happen, interesting enough, with this. I think I had the UAD Chandler Curve Bender boosting like 3.5 dB at 20K. That's usually my starting point, just to give me a nice kind of hyped high end to mix into. Then I even had another plug-in version of a Hindi Amps unit that is like a tube unit. It's a plug-in, but it's a tube unit, and the air band on that is absolutely amazing. It adds a lot of sizzle and just air on the top end. I kind of reluctantly started with both of those over the mix bus, and for all the instrumentation, it was working really well. But then when I got to the vocals at the very end, I was really nervous about what that was going to do. As soon as I pulled the fader up, there weren't any harshness issues. I didn't even end up using a de-esser. I think on Rachel's vocal, there were one or two little phrases where I ended up putting the Soothe plugin, just catching some really slight things. So I was really surprised that I got away without a de-esser on a Sony style mic, mixing into mix bus with some brighter, hyped high end. So really great results. I was really surprised. So it's really cool to come back to designs like this that I'd, kind of given up on, and then years later, come back to it and be like, wow, this is really great. Wasn't expecting that. There's so many things about the Z² tube line that just stood out to me. It's a lot of fine details. There's things like on the back of the mic, when I opened the mic up to do the tube swap for the first time, I went to put the body back on, and I was looking, and I went, uh-oh, which side of the mic is the front? Because the only indication of front and back on the mic is on the body tube. And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know where the front or back is. Like, one of the small things ADK did is they have an indentation on the actual body in the tube so that you can only put the tube on a certain way so that when the tube goes on, the badge is always facing forward for the capsule. So lots of really small things like that stood out that kind of really make it feel like a premium product. Another funny one, I wasn't going to mention this, but there's a smell when you open up that case that is, I don't know how to describe it. A lot of new mics, you open it up and it's kind of this weird chemical smell. This was almost like, I don't know, eucalyptus or something. I don't know how to put it, but the mic and the packaging smelled really good. I know that's a weird thing to say, but that stood out. And the case that you get, the case is beautiful. The tweed case is great. You get a really nice premium pop filter in there. All the cabling's great. You even get a premium XLR cable in there. Shock mounts were solid. 3 different tube choices. It's a lot of money. You're getting up there into the premium boutique stuff, but there's just so many things that stood out to me that really made me feel like, this is definitely worth the money. And again, this was an interesting proposition for me, walking into doing a review of a style of mic that I have not liked in the past. So it kind of blew me away and ended up working out really well. To me, over the years, this is kind of what I wish the Sony mic would sound like based off my past experience. So it's been a while. It would be cool to get a Sony in here and go back and forth between the two and see what the differences are. But to me, based off my experience, I'd have no problem adding this mic in here to the collection. It just worked out really well and really blew me away. So don't forget to download session files. Check all those out. Thanks for watching.